afternoon, my friends. This is Rick, and you're seated at the table, and we are looking at House Steiner in the Lyran Commonwealth, or Lyra Commonwealth, depending on how you only pronounce it, how you choose, from Battletech. This is FASA and the Great House source books. House Steiner is considered the third weakest or third strongest of the great houses in the inner sphere. Militarily speaking, they're number one when it comes to economically speaking. They're probably the most wealthiest house in existence. They have the most strongest. I don't know. The Free Worlds League actually would probably outproduces them production-wise, but it's a very, very fine margin. When it comes to having some of the best tech items, some of the reminiscent of Star League era technology, their factories, they have much more robust factory base in their production of heavy mechs, assault mechs, heavy tanks, specialized equipment, things like this. Their starship, their star jump or jump ship capacity is mediocre, but not nearly as bad as some of the other houses. They are probably second to the top in output on an average year. A couple dozen jump ships and maybe 100 or so drop ships a year, a couple hundred drop ships, puts them slightly behind the Free Worlds League, House Marik, in production. They are probably size-wise about the equivalent to House Kurita in size, just a hair bigger than the Free Worlds League, smaller than the Federated Suns. Of course, everybody's smaller size-wise than the Federated Suns. The lot of conjecture over the last few decades is that somehow or another House Steiner is based off of Germany and the Germanic countries of southern and central, or western and south central Europe. So if you put Italy and Germany and Austria and Hungary together, maybe with Belgium, a few of the Scandinavian countries, this is the hodgepodge collection that you get. There's also kind of a running gag that they are, heavily Germanic, which is true to a limited degree, but not necessarily on a grand scale. Another thing that sets their house apart from most of the others is that their nobility system is much more entrenched in depth. They really, truly follow the concept of king, queen, duke, duchess, court, countess, count, baron, etc., to a rigid kind of format, except the king or quote queen is called the archon, and then we go from the grand dukes, and on the way down. The militarily speaking, the Steiners have some really top-notch military outfits available to them, well equipped, but their command structure is very poor. The problem here is because of the nobility system, because of the depth of wealth, you have a lot of what's called social generals. A lot of the command structure are purchased. These are people who really not necessarily have experience in warfare or operating a large military unit of any size, being put into a uniform and putting in charge of these outfits. So the average soldier, the average non-com is very compatible with pretty much every house military out there on that particular front, but the command structure is pretty weak, and this allows their foes to outwit them, outmaneuver them, outthink them on a regular basis. Usually the only reason why House Steiner wins is conflicts against its foes, which in this case is the Draconis Combine, and the Free Worlds League is brute force. They just literally come in with enough stuff to boot stomp the bad guy, their opponents, into the dirt, and keep doing so because they're able to dig deep into their pockets to feel and form, pay for this particular mindset. but it's not sufficient enough for them to have gained an edge over their opponents. Of all the houses, the Steiners are faced up against the quite defense-capable Free Worlds League, who has a serious grudge against them. So there's no love lost between these two houses, and the Freeworlders will shoot a Lyran every time they get a chance. Will kill them, make them dead, as opposed to trying to give them any kind of leeway, any kind of space or benefit of the doubt. Kuritans, ironically, their mindset for military campaign is actually not uncommon to House Steiner. There's a lot of discussion out there on how this works, and I'm sure a lot of people will say, "Oh, you know what you're talking about." That Koreans, the House Kurita's military is actually, the leadership's quite adept, quite savvy, quite smart, quite disciplined. The problem is they have this Hollywood version of Bushido. They really believe in it. They buy into it. The command and the leadership really they really follow these codes pretty harshly. What that says is that while their command structure is solid and pretty well experienced, if you shoot one of them, if one of them becomes disabled in the middle of a campaign, if the general leading the Kurita force becomes disabled or dishonored or whatever, suddenly everybody comes to a screeching halt, because the rank and file are conditioned not to think for themselves per se. They don't think outside the box very well. As long as the plan is solid and they have a solid commander to follow the plan, they have an advantage. And they will boot stomp their foes until they go away or they die or they win. That's the same mindset the Steiners do. We will come in with enough force to boot stomp you until you stop moving, and we win. But our leadership's weak, and we can't think outside the box very well. Or quite frequently, we think without a box at all. And because we don't do that, we're completely unprepared for the normal conventions of conflict and tactics and strategy and things like this, where the House Kuritas will have all their strategy, all the tactics heavily thought out and planned in advance, and the box is heavily constructed, well made, and the core leadership of that box is going to make damn sure that box, the plan, succeeds until it doesn't, and then everything falls apart. So we look at the Steiners and the house that comes with it. Let's see, this was circa 1987 by the FASA Corporation, introduction for the house, and the Successor States of 5 separate empires, each ruled by a single family, has reigned over their hundreds of worlds for hundreds of years. These ruling families control vast resources, countless people, and near limitless possibilities. They're also responsible for the many planets now in ruin and wastelands that stand in mute condemnation of the 5 successor lords' inability to coexist. The defiant clenched fist, the House Steiner banner, flies over the Lyran Commonwealth, the third largest realm, defiant indeed, but the Lyrans and their vigorous economy are unmatched in their ability to reflect some of the material glory of the Star League era. Although their military history is not as equally glorious, the House Steiner mocks its enemies by prospering despite the setbacks. Indeed, is slowly but surely entangling the entire inner sphere in its webs of commerce and products. Goes on. Showing uncertain reads, dawn of a new age. I think they're roughly 600. Lyran Commonwealth's roughly 600 years old, a little more than 650 years old. The Free Worlds League, by default, is the oldest of all the houses, preceded by the Confederation, I think. Don't quote me on that. If you go to the Sarnanet, you can find some of that information out. I notice the Sarnanet has a lot of great stuff on it, but it's not completely comprehensive. There's a lot of missing material or a lot of stuff that's in conjecture. So it's a matter of you decide what works for you. Let's see, going about their history, and we're not going to deep into this. Someday down the road, when I start looking for things to do, perhaps that I will break some of that stuff down. What I'd like to do is, down the road, is I'd like to focus on the smaller political entities within each house and how they tie together their main house and how they interact with others to give you a greater understanding of how the houses work and why they work the way they do, and just how, from a game perspective, from whether it's the tabletop wargaming, BattleTech, or the role-playing MechWarrior version of the game, can be tied in, and why there's this game system has such a rich option in playing a play field. It's just vast, and it's always been a great, held my attention ever since it come out. I mean, seriously, it's been pretty great, and I love the books, I love the novels, until the Dark Age hit, and then I lost total. I was just disgusted with it and went off onto a different tangent, which to my regret, because I haven't been able to regain ground since. So most of my material is 25 years old, and once it hit a certain wall, I was done. And now there's so much new stuff out there that I'll never be able to catch up with, never be able to acquire it from my shelves. And then it's a monetary thing. My priorities changed as I got older. Need to have a house. That took a lot of my free money right there. So it is what it is. We get on. First Succession Wars. If you really want some good stories, you want to see the Black Plains Legion stuff that they put out. There's a couple other great websites out there, blog, YouTube channels, and things like that. When I think about it, if I think about it, I'll put links to some of them below. And if I don't remember to do that, well, then forgive me. The Steiner's book is also slightly put out just a hair different. A lot of the other source books, the military is concentrated in its own chapter. They've spread the units out throughout this one for some reason, just trying to be different or something. Here's the third Lyran Guards, 11th Lyran Guards, kind of I like the other one's format for the military just a hair better. Third Succession War. This book here has weathered better. It still has its issues, which is why I keep it in a plastic bag when I'm not utilizing it, and it's starting to come apart like the other ones have. Is what it is. There's so much stuff, and we're still working through history, right? Elizabeth Steiner, the Third Succession War, was toward the third. So the MechWarrior and BattleTech began in 3025 roughly, and I've said this in other videos. And the Third Succession War is ground to a halt, more or less coming to a conclusion, as all sides are basically deciding that they don't want to continue with what they've been doing, and it's just a break. They're all taking a break so they can rebuild and resupply, and so on and so forth. Now, House Steiner in the Third Succession War was not so much. They did some operations and some invasions and stuff. For the most part, it was defensive in nature. They were more concentrated on their economy and commerce and making money, and a few occasional internal disputes. Unlike the Free Worlds League and to some degree the Federated Commonwealth or the Federated Sons, the Steiners did have some internal problems and some internal strife, especially amongst the Steiners themselves. Their nobles and smaller houses within, for the most part, were behaving themselves, as opposed to some of their neighbors, but there were still some problems that popped up here and there, and later some big problems became a big, later down the road. So we got regimental nicknames, second Donegal Guards, Nocturne Guards. Yeah, I don't like the way these are laid out. They're not as good. Later down the road, there's field manuals that come out in the 3052 or so era, some 25 years later, after the Fourth Succession War concluded and the Clan War started. That gives us a much better in-depth view of each individual house's military standing and the current politics of the moment. And we'll review those eventually, and you'll see they're much more superior than these particular books are when it comes to that. But there's so much backstory information in these core books to give you a really understanding of these factions. And if you're going to role play a house or be a member of a military of this, the Lyran Commonwealth having this information gives you an understanding as to why you do the things you do, and so on and so forth, and what the mindset of your leadership would be, etc., etc. Or if you're something opposing them, you would like to know this stuff. Maybe adds flavor to the story. If you're in a mercenary command, you might be employed by these people. You might be find yourself up in a battle against them. So you get some of the mercenary commands: the Always Faithful, the Filthy Lucre, Hanson Rust Riders, Waco's Rangers, Barrett's Fuselers, Heisen's Hotheads, Cranston's Snords Irregulars. I got a couple source books for these, and we will get to those at some point too, just so you know. All right, social political structure. The government of the Lyran Commonwealth is a stable and remarkably representative government. Stability is inherent in a strong Steiner monarchy, which has also been wise enough to allow at least the airing of viewpoints other than their own. And in this war-torn era, the flexibility of the Lyran government is nothing short of remarkable. Despite the apparent dedication to open debate, the atmosphere of the court and other Lyran powers that be is as thick with political intrigues and plots as any other inner sphere. A wit from Tharkad once remarked that while open debate might be the soaring of a Lyran leader's soul, it never stopped the same leader from rolling in the political mud like a lowly mire eagle. Like battling brothers, however, the Lyran politicians and noblemen will put aside their differences to present a united front against any threat from beyond their borders. When the danger is over, everybody knows it will not be long before the political mudslinging and scheming start up again. Planet Tharkad is the capital of the Lyran Commonwealth, and Tharkad City the official home of both the ruling family and the rest of his government. The Royal Palace, the Royal Court, and the Government Houses are the three major buildings known as the Triad because they fit together in a triangular shape. The Archonship, so taking an example from the ancient Athenians, the original architects of the Lyran Commonwealth created a committee of 9 archons to set the policy originally, and then it became the archon. There's something interesting too. Of all the houses, the Lyrans are the only ones who have battle mechs posted within their throne room. They have a pair of them sitting that bracket the archon's seat in the throne room, and they're live and manned all the time. And the colors change, but it's always there. And I think it's usually a pair of griffins, but it's just the idea. Just the idea, right? The Commonwealth Council, the Royal Court, the nobility. Among all the successor states, the Lyran Commonwealth maintains the most open system of nobility. Although most titles are hereditary, passed down to the firstborn offspring, chances of a commoner win the title are considerably greater here than anywhere else. There is, in fact, such a plethora of titled people in the Commonwealth that some critics say that to be a commoner may be more of a distinction. In reply, defenders of the system point out that the chance at nobility gives many a commoner more motivation and more patriotism. The titles of nobility tend to follow ancient Germanic forms. Remembering tales she had heard of her own ancestor, it was Catherine Martison Steiner who revived the terms Margrave, Graf, Landgrave, and the use of bond in connection to a baron's name. Title Duke or Duchess usually reserved for those who have acquired or are about to acquire a controlling interest in planets, quote, more than one. The wealth of the world determines the Duke's status among his peers, etc., etc. The title of Duke can also be awarded to industrial giants because they control industries that affect the whole Commonwealth. Many noble has come by his title through landholding, Brussels indentation. The owners of a corporation on a property are given the equivalent title. Once again, so you get so many titled nobles for so many different versions that they have conflicts of interest, and there's a a hierarchy among them, and some are more, quote, noble than others, more recognized than others, and it causes contention and issues, right, in there. So the States General. States General is a parliamentary body that divides the Archon throughout the 684 years. Yeah, I was right. Just 684 years, so it's 25-30 years younger than the Free Worlds League as a nation state, if you will. The early years, the State General, provinces, the Federation of Sky, the Tamar Pact, the Proctor Dogigal, and I might pronounce it right. So, the Federation of Sky is an industrial matrix of the Lyran Commonwealth, currently led by Aldo Lestrade. The Federation has always been the most independent of the 3 founding members, with their heavy English, Irish, Scottish ancestry. Most of the citizens of Sky tend to view the Commonwealth government and Steiners as an unnecessary evil. right? So the Tamer Pact has been reduced. After many years of warfare, the Tamer Pact is reduced to almost half its original size by invading armies of Draconis Combine. This definitely colors the political outlook of the region, which is in constant danger of further losses, led by Selbin Koswa. Selbin Koswa III, the ruling Koswas want to regain both their wealth and their former planet holdings. As they are vocal opponents of the Steiner government, but their reasons differ from those of the Strahd family of Sky. After waiting 100 years to take back up the planet Tamar, the Koswas are convinced the Steiner family has no intention of trying to recover other Tamar Pact worlds still held by Kurita. Right? So it gives you an idea why some of the politics and some of the stresses are going on behind the scenes. The Protectorate of Donegal is a paradox of the Commonwealth, as though it's the richest in resources, economically the poorest of the three founding members. Also, like being the most sparsely populated of the three regions, is nevertheless developed into a center of political power. This sense's untapped potential is what drives the average politician from the Protectorate to far-reaching programs that look into the future instead of the present, home of the Steiner family. And Tharkad, the Protectorate, is also the source of strong winds of diplomacy. Of the four provinces that make up the Protectorate, so each one is, we're back to minor houses that control sections of these nation states to different degrees, and it adds to the political issues inside. Commonwealth Judiciary, internal politics and policies, the Lyran Commonwealth Civil Service. See right here. The Articles of Acceptance. The Commonwealth also expects its member planets to enforce all laws passed by the Archon and the States General. As privileged described, individual planets have the right to alter these to suit societal conditions, but Tharkad demands that the original intent of the law be honored. Planets may seek exemption from various laws because of religious, economic, and social conflicts, but this is rare. These planets would have to petition their provincial Supreme Court and also ask for a special waiver from the Archon and the State General. Overt political goals. Of the 5 successor states, Lyran Commonwealth probably has the least interest in becoming a dominant force among the war-savaged remains of the old Star League. Formed by the Union's 3 defense leagues, the Commonwealth continues the spirit of self-defense to this day, caring little for glory or won riches. The public goal of the Steiner family has been the continued protection and prosperity of all those who live beneath its benevolent reign. The current nobility also embraces this idea, except for Duke Sebin Qualza of Tamar, who spends his time dreaming of triumphantly winning back those worlds that once belonged to the Tamer Pact. Right? So, interstellar relations with the Free Worlds League. The single overriding difficulty that House Steiner has in dealing with America's Free Worlds League are the Ladder of Realms' countless petty principalities. Each has its own twists and tangle, rules and regulations, which makes arranging even a simple meeting a real test of patience. Its chaos has also been severely hampered by efforts to ransom Commonwealth prisoners. Knowledge about where McWare was captured and by which Marik unit is vital information for the diplomats trying to arrange their release. This morass of red tape becomes even more complicated when attempts are made to contact members of House Marik itself. It goes on, right? Compelling Confederation, Confederate Sons, Draconis Combine. Early years of succession wars, House Kurita managed to push back the Commonwealth ease, taking several dozen worlds in the process. Since then, Combine's leaders have considered the Lyrans to be their inferiors. This has colored all the dealings between the two houses, to say the least. The dealings between the two houses, or the condescending Kurita attitude has made dialogue difficult. The Prefery, Comstar, so we got political goals, the Archon, the Lyran Intelligence Corps, the Lick. There's every house has its own secret service. Like I said, it's a combination of FBI and CIA combined. Some houses actually have different ones that serve those roles. CIA is outside covert stuff going on in other people's backyards, and the FBI being what's going on inside our backyard, kind of thing, and keeping ties on, and so on and so forth. So the houses each have that, and depending on who's in charge of the house at the time, the powers of those entities wax and wane. Sometimes they're extremely powerful and known for excess and For example, Bokai within the Lick has been known for doing some very nasty things to its own people, and depending on who was the Archon at the time, and it gave rise to some other organizations that are secret, like Heimdall, that oppose members of House Steiner and the nobility who believe in the credo and the idea and the flavor of the Commonwealth will sometimes check and balance their own people, including their own leadership, when that leadership step out of bounds, especially if they go rogue and go extreme, which you don't see in something like the Confederation, the compelling Confederation, when a lot of times their leadership loses their marbles and goes off on some insane, crazy tangents that do horrible damage to both their internal and external interests. And sometimes they're bloody geniuses, and other times they're terrible detriments. But they don't have as strong a check and balance system set up. Not to say that they don't occasionally have it, but they just don't. So they're an intelligence corps, Archon, Royal Court, the States General. Once again, the strengths and weaknesses. Popularity of the Commonwealth has never been greater than it is now amongst its citizens. Both Lyrans are well pleased with their political rights, their general economic well-being. Although there are pockets of discontent, the general satisfaction with the present system makes it popular and rising highly unlikely. The government's policy to lose control over its member worlds has been effective in fostering growth. Programs aimed at stimulating industry through generous grants of venture capital to burgeoning businesses and various rewards for successful enterprise and create an atmosphere of economic vigor and fluidity. Indeed, these policies have given the Lyran Commonwealth the highest average standard of living and the most recovered economy in the inner sphere, taking another disastrous war to significantly dim the economic future. The general structure of the government is another point in the Commonwealth's favor. Though the Archon's rule is absolute, the existence of the State General, the Commonwealth Council, and the Commonwealth Judiciary do provide some checks and balances. Although the ambitions of individual Lyrans could endanger this balance, the situation is remarkably stable. Use titles on the negative side, the government's loose hold over its member states sometimes fosters the feeling that the Lyrans belong to a particular world first and the Commonwealth second. Stubborn independence has caused some serious troubles in the Commonwealth's history. The Archon has often had to put down these rebellions with a show of force. And it goes on to some details. Because Steiner maintains equally loose control of its business sector, there have also been a few rebellions and outbreaks in the sector too. In a few instances, industrials forgot to pay their taxes, failed to honor manufacturing contracts to the military, or forgot to donate raw materials to the government. Depending on the situation, the government politely or not so politely reminds these groups of their duty. Sometimes it takes a little more than that, and the Archon will have to replace the firm's executive staff with their own special administrators until the situation is corrected. So although plots and scheming are not as thick as they are in other successor states, the atmosphere of intrigue is strong enough in Tharkad City to interfere with the government's functioning. Sometimes, for example, the least sophisticated nobles are so intimidated they will withdraw from debates whose outcome will seriously affect their individual worlds. Sometimes the outlying, smaller backwater places find themselves feeling outclassed by their much more sophisticated and bigger neighbors that sometimes, to their detriment, they don't stand up and do with their business. Religion and philosophy. Of the five successor states, Lyran Commonwealth is probably the most tolerant towards diversity of religious beliefs. Though this leniency is in no way official policy, nobility tending to be either Protestant or Christians or Buddhist, most Lyrans believe that religious persuasion has little bearing on the pursuit of wealth, which is a commonly shared goal. Although this religious tolerance would have led to the development of one new doctrine that blended the major religions of newly arrived immigrants seem to grow more sharply defined after transplanting. This report discusses 5 major religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. But you find that most of these religions are quite common in all the houses. Their influence varies per house, and how much the houses, the house leadership, in a particular house, allows them to function. Right. Some houses are much more stressed on a specific religion, and sometimes there's the state religion, which, like in House Kurita, there's a state religion, and so they kind of agree to disagree or politely disencourage or ignore alternate religions unless they become a problem. And then it becomes a problem, and they deal with it pretty vigorously, in some cases extremely. So, one start faith and other beliefs, relationships between religions, myths and legends. Each successor state has its own share of tales or lost buried treasure from the Star League era. These stories are fueled by old videos of huge glittering cities. There was opulence only a memory today. Popular culture is filled with myths of hidden treasures and worlds untouched by the 7 centuries of strife. 700 years of succession story, 700 years of war, and broken by a 300 odd year golden age of the Star League. And even throughout the Star League, there was still a constant conflict, because the Star League was the reunification war, blah, 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 when they first decided to bring the periphery into the by force into the Star League, and then the Stefan Amorous issue, and then the destruction of and then the beginning of the Succession War. So pretty much all through the 700 years, there's this terrible mindset in America, and it always has been America. And these days, in my personal opinion, it gets slightly off subject, but it kind of ties in with some of this stuff. It's this forever war mindset. There's a lot of this currently because Biden took us out of Afghanistan, finally officially closed the book there. And it's going to cause problems down the road. There's no getting around it. The fact that the Taliban it just resumed control after 20 years of being suppressed, and in a position are much more stronger and better off than they were 20 years ago. 20 years of conflict against the U.S. and our allies' forces have honed several generations of warriors and learned tactics, and then by leaving the country and the subtle disintegration of the Afghan quote experiment, left the Taliban far better equipped than they were ever. Thanks to our largest, all the money and effort we put in, those poor people that gave their lives or lost their lives in this 20 years of conflict to try to enforce our belief and will on a place that's been forever dominated by its own mindset. Sometimes you don't listen to the stories of the history. You don't listen to where we were and where our grandfathers were and our great grandfathers and grandmothers were, and the things that they did and didn't do. Afghanistan is the death place of many empires, and we're just the latest in a bad situation. And yet now there's always voices. The Warhawks are now itching for yet another conflict. Where do we put boots on the ground next? It's the same stuff. That's the whole gist and basis of the Forgotten Realm, the BattleTech world and universe. Humans are humans, and after 1,000 years of technology and evolution and expansion of stars, we're still as dedicated a mindset 1,000 years from now in a fictional world as we are now, and we were 300 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago. That is the human issue, right? Anyway, so relations, really, myth and legends, strengths and weaknesses. The Lyran peoples were by nature a practical and skeptical lot, which is why new religion has not made much of a dent. Lyrans are more likely to convert to a business-like decision on how the religion would benefit them than by blatant politicizing. The same reason it's unlikely anyone in the Archon included could sway the citizens throughout the religious pressure. The Lyrans are self-confident, they are practical, with a strong faith in their current political system. The legend of General Kuriski's arrival in the Commonwealth is a good example. Finally, the great diversity of religions has not prevented a confrontation between beliefs. As much as the Commonwealth has done to promote religious tolerance, there's always the possibility of confrontation lead to a major conflict. Mentioned previously as a writer grew up, blah, blah, blah. So, military forces. It is difficult at first observation to understand why the Lyran Commonwealth is not the preeminent military power among the successor states. This era, when wars are fought with every available shred of technology as well as territory, each side holding the most powerful equipment should, it seems, easily vanquish the opposition. Victory in war is not simply a question of who has the greater firepower, however, but which side is the best able to exploit its assets and which has the best planning and leadership. Historians viewing the parade of bungling, inexperienced, unqualified Steiner military commanders would have to conclude conclude that only its economic strength has kept the Commonwealth alive through the depths of the succession wars. Troubles with the Lyran military can be summed up by two ancient sayings: too many chiefs and not enough Indians, and war is not a tea party. Early in its history, the Lyran Commonwealth created the title Social General for many important personages that had no other official title. Soon these powerful social generals decided that as generals, they should wear military regalia and mingle with the real military. Having no military experience beyond possibly a few years of service in the local militia, these quote generals have no concept either of tactics or planning, said they played soldier, while the experienced officers grumbled, planning parades and designated elaborate, impractical uniforms. Soon several crack units were reduced to the formation, marching for special occasions, their mechs polished and brightly painted for show. Genuine military men were forced to compete in the social arena in order to curry favor and maintain their position. You get the gist. There's some other issues here, too. And I discuss this in these various books, and it's commonly discussed pretty heavily in all lots of other YouTube channels and in this internet and whatever battle. There's other platforms and formats where people get together and discuss all things BattleTech. The House Steiner's production of mechs and tanks and stuff is on the heavy side. They, for whatever reasons, even in the early days, they never emphasized light and medium designs. They didn't produce the factories did not produce a lot of them. They were more geared on producing bigger, heavier stuff. There's a running gag that crops up all the time of a 100-ton Atlas being used as a scout mech. The idea of a mech that at best moves 30 miles an hour on a flat surface, sneaking around, that's, the biggest thing in the field, sneaking around out there and trying to recon something is kind of, ludicrous at best, but it's not actually outside the question. It is actually a mindset that bigger means better. More firepower means more firepower. And it means greater might, and might makes right kind of mindset. So when you have a heavy force, a couple things crop into issue. One, yeah, they maintain a pretty good sized military. They have a significantly large group, core of regiments and support that's on par with just about everybody out there. And they're on the heavy side, which means that pound for pound, ton for ton, weapon for weapon, the Steiner's military is two to four times the force multiplier than anybody else out there. They're going to field companies of assault mechs. They're going to field battalions of heavy mechs. And we're going to have a spattering of lighter mechs. And for recon purposes, they're going to use BTOs, they're going to use helos, they're going to use infantry units with fast-moving vehicle craft, but they don't have a lot of those because they don't believe in them per se. This makes them a really well defensible force, but on the offensive side of things, they are they're slow to react, slow to maneuver, and once they get somewhere, if you can't move your problem, the Steiners are going to stomp that problem into the mud and take it and destroy it and capture it, because they just literally have the force and numbers of armor and tonnage to do this. But that means that whatever it is they want can't be moving. So in reality, if they wanted to take 100 worlds from a neighbor, they in theory could, but the logistics prevents them from doing that sort of thing, and their mindset too. It's just not in their nature to be a invading, aggressive warhawk mindset and that nature stuff. It's more about parading around and for their generals and stuff and stature in maneuvering and politics and crap than it is for being an actual military force. The lack of lighter mechs, so their production lines don't produce a lot. Now, later in 3030 or so, when House Steiner, House Devon, or Davion or Devon start to get together, start hatching some plans, and start working together to eventually create what becomes the Federated Commonwealth, their exchange of abilities and equipment help balance each other out. So the Federation's crack command staff helps teach and lend and show and provide the Lyran military with some much needed serious command and control. It also, the Federated Commonwealth's production of light and medium mechs, especially medium mechs, helps to influx into the Steiner military to give them a bit more of a rounded out fashion. Another thing about the Steiner military is that they're not keen on their support their support units and their core units. So battle mechs tend to be battle mech commands. So battle mech regiment, battle mech battalion rarely on a regular basis have serious support units, armor and infantry units and support units as a group, where the Federated Sons have perfected this, they call it regimental combat team, but this concept of utilizing everything well, and each one fulfilling their particular niche of the battlefield and conducting and coordinating and projecting that force, where the Steiners utilize them in their fashion, but not very good at that, in my minds. So it says the term top heavy also covers the major problem in Lyran equipment. It's not that the mechs themselves are faulty, it's that the Lyran forces have a disproportionate number of heavy mechs. It's because they cannot compete well in situations calling for speed and maneuverability. The problem is partly a result of geography and partly economics. The days of the Star League, Lyran factories excelled at turning out large mechs, and so most of their contracts were for heavy fighting machines. When the Star League dissolved, the Lyran Commonwealth still had the capacity to turn out great numbers of mechs, almost exclusively large ones. Ideally, mech for mech, house for house, the Lyrans outproduced everybody else. They produced a lot more machinery of war and heavy equipment than anybody else. Now, maybe it's not a huge, it's not like 50% more, but 10, 20% better and higher production. So they have a lot more stuff out there. And that also means that their equipment that they have is in much better shape. And because they don't go on a lot of offensive operations, that also means that the equipment they have is in pretty good shape. It's well maintained. It's not maybe pristine. It's still, but some of it's still old, but it's going to be in physically better shape than most of its foes, and that it helps, makes a difference too. So even when the Commonwealth developed the capacity of manufacturing smaller mechs, top officers did not order them and had those factories converted to making heavy mechs. Predominance of heavy mechs means that Steiner units are often the only one thing in their favor, brute force. Current high command recognizes usefulness of mixed mech forces, but lacking enough smaller mechs, they must still often plan around this unfortunate handicap. Despite these drawbacks, the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces still stand out among the Army's successor wars. 75 mech regiments, the House Steiner ranks third in numbers, with the Federated Sons first, Draconis Combine second. Commonwealth's powerful economic makes its armies the best equipped overall. Reforms in command structure, producing a noble improvement, especially undoubtedly will benefit from the infusion of new ideas and equipment brought about the alliance with House Defiance. All right. The LCAF is on the brink of shaking off its historic burdens and asserting its full might. And that would make them a very powerful foe indeed, if they can overcome that and maintain it. So we got senior officer, mech warriors, fighter pilots, armored crews, support personnel, infantry. The structure of the LCAF is a complex bureaucracy. To achieve the monumental military task of the Lyran Commonwealth, the Steiner Armed Forces are divided into 16 departments, each with its own specialized function and trained personnel. These departments must operate with considerable initiative and self-efficiency to ensure that combat units in the field receive both proper supplies and crucial information they need to fight effectively. So, in some aspects, like their military, their industrial machine, and their economy and their government, the military is a major bureaucracy of paper pushers and desk jockeys, and they have an abundance of departments and sub-departments, which causes its own issues to some degree, right? So we got, I'm not going to go through the list of all of them because there's quite a few of them. Some of the other houses are much more compact or less Byzantine when it comes to that. So there's another reason why the Federation Sons military is such top-notch, top-kick in all the military units, in part because their command and control and their support logistics system is a little more streamlined, much more intermeshed with each other, and more confident in working together. So, deployment of the forces, said, and we go into that. I don't want to go into all the details on that, but unit deployments, unit tables, weapons industries. So, typical Commonwealth units Composition of these average Steiner units is very much like those of the other successor states. Even here in a prosperous industrial Commonwealth, however, the scarcity of working machinery makes it near impossible to create more than a few specialized units based on specific weapon systems. The light lances of Commonwealth usually have at least one commando, manufactured by Coventry Metalworks, flushed out by Stingers, Wasps, and so on, etc., etc. Weapons industries, and there's a plethora of them. All right. Military supplies. In addition to major companies, there are many others churning out parts of smaller pieces of equipment for the military. Lyran Commonwealth military is by far the best equipped army in our sphere, experiencing real shortages only in ultra high-tech equipment such as battlefield computers, target acquisition sensors. This is not to say that Lyran Industries can always produce enough spare parts for the military. There is yet to be an army totally satisfied with the supply situation. Occasional shortages of spare parts, especially for mechs and fighters produced outside the Commonwealth, do occur. Bulk of spare parts are frequently diverted. There's another thing. And I've mentioned this in different forms, but we're going to talk just a hair about that. Because of 700 years of conflict and the brutality of the first and second succession war, specifically the first, and the destruction of a lot of manufacturing capability, and more important, intelligent or knowledge in how things are manufactured, has created a lot of problems. And so over the centuries, it's salvage. We're back to that salvage thing. It's quite common for every house to acquire captured equipment, captured salvage, purchased from, quote, allies at the moment. So within every house, big or small, periphery or inner sphere, military or mercenary command, and all the exception of perhaps Comstar, and it's an entire other entity, which is actually a third, if you want, the unofficial sixth or unofficial seventh house of the inner sphere, and I will be doing their source book down the road when I get done with the 5 great houses. We'll do Comstar, and then we'll work into our periphery, because there's just so much stuff to share. So I like doing this stuff. It's really my cup of tea. So the problem is that most of all these entities end up with this collage, this mismatch of other stuff, and it's unlike today in our modern militaries today. We capture enemy equipment, we dismantle it, destroy it, give it to frickin' museums. On a rare occasion, sell it to the civilians. You won't find Russian-made equipment or French-made equipment or even British-made equipment, military, tanks and helicopters and things like that, any significant numbers in the United States military, if period at all. You will find U.S. military equipment, usually second-generation stuff, in other people's forces, especially the least, the smaller nations of the world who are, quote, allies or have been under the wings of the United States, and we've supplemented them and supported them and given them stuff or sold them stuff. But for the most part, you don't see what you do in the inner sphere. So having stuff manufactured, having House Steiner have compelling Confederation mechs, Free World's mechs, Kurita mechs, and Devon mechs, and even the occasional periphery state mechs in their military. The same with their combat vehicles, their tanks, is accepted. And now the downside of this, of course, we're back to it creates another bottleneck or issue with your logistics command, because if you this is probably one of the reasons why our modern militaries in our world today would not do this, is because it's trying to get parts for a Czechoslovakian-made tank for our military would be problematic at best. It would be hard to get, or we'd have to hand manufacture something for that machine. So it makes maintenance hours for those vehicles would be much more extensive than homemade equipment. So the same thing would go to the houses. So if the houses are using a tank or an APC that's manufactured by somebody else, especially if it's not an ally of the house, it's captured equipment, keeping that thing functioning and operational is going to be because your technicians are wizards and geniuses, and because your scavenger portions of your logistics chain is pretty swift, or you've been lucky to acquire a stockpile of parts during a raid, which is also the reason for some of these raids. You can't turn when you can't produce enough material at home to field the significant forces you feel you need to have, you can't turn your noses up at acquired equipment. Now, in some places, some houses will regulate that stuff to secondary and trinary forces, i.e. provincial units or militias, home guard units, and things like this, because it's not as important to have it in the main battle units. But this causes a problem too. So when your enemy invades your turf, and your secondary forces that have to take the brunt of the fighting until your primary forces can arrive, that local militia that might have a battalion of 36 mechs, except only 27 of them were actually operational because the rest are down for missing parts or needing repaired, or they're lacking the technique somebody who can make those repairs happen, and are waiting for somebody to come along to fix them. Puts them at weakens these forces, and so they look great on paper, but not so great in the actual function. And of those 26 actual functioning mechs, probably every single one of them has something that's broken or not working. It's broken, leaking, or loose. That was a mantra when I took my CDL license. The instructor said, make sure when you explain everything to your instructor at the DMV, it's just make sure it's not loose, cracked, loose, or leaking, and you're good. It's just the same thing. So we have deficiencies across the board, even in mainline units and forces. There's always a chance that less than 10% of a standing military command unit is functional. Right? They may have down machines for repairs. This is in our modern military too, but what they don't have is a vast surplus of replacements. So if I have to pull two of my Atlases out of my assault company, and because they need to be, this one needs this and this one needs that, and it's going to be months before we get the parts or we can figure out how to get it fixed. Now my assault company is now at 10 machines, and it means I got 2 lances and a half, which may not matter, but if you get into a major push match, every mech matters, every tank matters. So if I lose one and they're destroyed completely, they explode, they're disintegrated, whatever, now I have to fill the breach, and we acquire a couple machines from our enemy, and they're functional, and my pilots survived losing their machine, and they can pilot that machine gets plugged into that assault company because it fits the primary. Now, I'm not going to put a 20-ton Locust in with a core of assault mechs because that's ridiculous, but if I have a 60-ton or a 70-ton or 90-ton machine that's manufactured by my enemy but functions, it might have just made itself useful until it becomes a problem. But that's something that every house has to deal with. So our training commands and military academies, various other awards and things like that, strengths and weaknesses of the military. The skill of the Steiner military is considered particularly defensive of its own worlds. There have been many inglorious defeats. It seems inconceivable that the successor state with the best equipped forces should be periodically humiliated. Some of this ineptitude is due to the Commonwealth's lack of light and mobile mechs. Although there are a few factories producing light mechs, the numbers are meager and those machines are notoriously unreliable. They usually end up on garrison duty. Only recently, with upgrading subsidiary plants and the high quality light Steiner mechs improved. Small number of Commonwealth account. The enemy soon exploited the Steiner's inability to cope with speedy opponents. If your enemy can keep running around, can run away from you on a regular basis, and they can be where you can't be, and you can't get there fast enough, there's another reason why being a heavily powered force is not necessarily a good thing. If I'm on a battlefield and my assault company is going to slog its way somewhere to get to the enemy, and the enemy decides not to be there when I get there, instead they use their twice as much faster machinery to get around me and go attack where I was before, then I can turn around and walk back. By the time, I could just end up spending all my time marching my guys back and forth to no avail, and the enemy lands, raids the factories, gets the stuff, and leaves, and I have done nothing except lose stuff and wear out my people, and no actual shots are fired, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's the same concept. So if I invade a planet to get something specific, that factory can't run away. Well, I'm going to get that thing. But if I'm coming after a planet to capture somebody important or to punish another country, another house's military unit for its audacity in its previous raid that they conducted, all they got to do is leave, because my forces are not going to outrun them. It just isn't going to happen. And then, of course, this concept of bad generalship. And then this negative feeding loop of wooden thinking points to another basic problem within the Commonwealth. The lack of skills among many of its senior officers. Most of these military cloth horses got their positions not by skill or merit, but through political connections and bribery. Scheming atmosphere is so prominent in the royal court that it's even sharper in the halls of Asgard and Darkhead City. Generalships are more often decided by scrutinizing the candidate's lineage than whether or not he has the past experience. And this plays its effect on the military in general. So the command, the men who and women who serve in the armed forces constantly get beat up or embarrassed by poor generals and poor leadership, tend to become jaded by it and become disillusioned by it, and morale issues begin to occur. So the lack of skilled men in high position explains the LCAF's lack of military imagination, though it does not pardon it. Even those officers who did win their posts on merit to find themselves afraid of performing too well out of fear that they may lose their post by showing up someone else. So there's another. So you have an actual military general who knows his stuff. He's got to be cautious, because if he actually does too well too often, he's going to make his peers jealous of him or her. And then they will F up his career. They will become, there was an old saying in, back when I was in the union, I was in the Teamsters union, and we would actually, because you don't want to work too hard. You don't want to look too efficient, because if you look too efficient and too hard, you make everybody else look bad. And that becomes a problem, because then everybody else becomes upset that you're making them look bad. They want you to perform and do more or less what is expected by their standards, by the group standards, which has its deficiencies and its issues, obvious. So it goes into some great details on that. And we got culture and arts, education, usually slightly more educated than their counterparts in the other succession states. This might mean the average Lyran knows rudiments of chemistry and recognizes the reference to the name of Shakespeare, but House Steiner still faces them all ignorance threatening to engulf everybody. So there's still a big problem. There's still a huge gulf between a lot of members of every house, the citizenry, and the intellectual portion of the citizenry. The education system is still trying to rebuild itself after 300 years of succession wars, and sometimes purposely being interfered with by outside forces, which Comstar plays a big role in this. But we'll talk about that in Comstar's source book when it comes around to it. So education, research facilities, daily life. So in the Lyran Commonwealth, disparities are not as dramatic as in most other successor states, because the level of technology is spread more evenly throughout the realm. At the present law, the fighting continues with the alliance between the Commonwealth and Federated Systems of France. Lyran citizens can look forward to even more widespread distribution of technology into daily life. Public media, societal problems. As a whole, Lyrans tend to be a tolerant people, not prone to irrational hatreds. Discrimination because of race, gender, or sexual persuasion is much less common during Tyrant's larger history. Because of the nobility system exists in all the successor states, class distinction is still very much alive in the Steiner world, although its title class tend to be more flexible and accessible than in other realms. Discrimination against the lower classes still exists. Social unrest and even riots are not uncommon, especially in worlds where the upper classes seek to so stratify society that the poor groups have virtually no chance of bettering their situation. And then it goes on. Crime is a definite problem in the more heavily populated worlds as well. Comstar and the Lyran Commonwealth, general relations, political influence. Like I said, whole section on Comstar, and we'll get to that eventually. Social economics. Commonwealth is the only successor state that retains even a hint of the wealth that once commonplace in the League era, Star League era. Such economic vitality in the face of almost constant warfare is a result of full cooperation and planning among industry, public, and the government. The government attitude, the political aims of its economy, consumer goods. Obviously, the Commonwealth produces a lot more consumer goods than even the Free Worlds League, and so a lot of it's consumed within the Commonwealth, but there's still an excess enough to be exported and to a significant profit, and a lot of their material is actually sought after by other house economy because they're better equipped, they're better manufacturer, they're better technology, and I don't know about cheaper, but you know, it is what it is. Security in the military forces. I'm talking Hesperus. Probably the most concentrated planet of industrial power in the Commonwealth when it comes to its military industrial complex is the Defiance Industries of Hesperus. And there have been some dozen or so raids and outright attacks on this by every house out there that have tried to acquire or steal or shut down the heart of the Commonwealth's military construction capabilities. And this place is a fortress in a mountainous planet to boot, and well defended, much to the chagrin of just about everybody who's ever attempted. The closest, Wolf Dragons, I think, is the only force that came closest to actually conquering the place. Period. I could be wrong on that, but they damn near did. They damn near did. The fact that they damn near did just tells you just how tough it is for anybody else to try and succeed there, because the House Steiners understand just how vital Hesperus is to their defense industry, that it is going to put up a major fight for it. Trade with other successor states, break them down by different houses. Then we get into strengths and weaknesses of the economy. The economy of the Commonwealth is based on the largest collection of industrial worlds in the inner sphere. To help feed this industrial juggernaut, House Steiner has many food-growing plants working at full steam, as well as potentially valuable agricultural worlds in the Protectorate. Uneagle, House Steiner also has the most stable monetary system, with the average inflation rate of meager 3%. Due to the buying power of the House bill outstraps even Comstar's credit. As for weakness, there is one minor possibility that the growing closeness of the two economies might trigger, with the Federated Sons, might trigger an economic crisis or even a depression among Steiner worlds. But the Lyran government's vigilance in correcting economic problems quickly and decisively makes this unlikely, but it bears watching. Right. The second possibility, that needs and desire both realms will outstrip the capacity of Commonwealth industry. So the weakened industrial complex in Federated Sons and its luxury and consumer good hungry populace would benefit greatly from this growing collusion between these two houses. But the truth is that is a deep well, and House Steiner, the Confederation's or economic output, consumer output, could literally be lost trying to fill that well. There's just such a huge demand of resources and material and consumer goods and manufactured stuff across that short, tiny border that Commonwealth could find themselves facing some shortages at home because they're trying to fulfill their neighbors' voracious demands. So then we get into the section on the personalities, various people in the house, and some of these are they're kind of would warrant their own video. It's just you can't do them justice. Some of them you've never heard of before, and they really don't pop up much. And then we get into a brief atlas, second in size and number of planets of 5 successor states. Lyran Commonwealth occupies a triangle space roughly 140 parsecs by 40 parsecs and runs 240 parsecs along its long border, the periphery. Within the mind-boggling space is more than 300 planets. More than 300. Remember, there's over 400 planets in the Confederation and another over 400 planets in the Free Worlds League. So in reality, it shouldn't be the second size. It's second in size because of volume of space, not number of of officially settled planets. But it's actually, it could be fourth or fifth. It's hard to quantify that because the House Kurita potentially has the least amount of settled systems in an area of space about the same size as the Commonwealth. The Federated Suns has an even bigger area of space, and it has quite a few settled systems. They're just further apart. And in the Federated Suns, a lot of their rich and industrial worlds are few and far between, and are concentrated in small areas where there's a vast outback of planets and colonies, and basically, backwater whatever's is the dominant in their house. Which is when we get to the Federated Suns, you'll see what hamstrings their military from being such a potent enemy, opposing force, and how we'll talk briefly about how Hans de Bont gets around that, and how the fourth succession war between the House Steiners and the House Davions managed to gang up and beat the living with Jesus out of the Kuritans and the Compellans. The Free World Leagues more or less got a pass. There was a little bit there, but just to make sure that everybody keep the Free World League on their toes, and to help keep them from going to the aid of their quote allies. But the Compellans took the biggest brunt of the losses in the Fourth Succession War, and I mean the biggest brunt. And then House Kurita took some, but the exchange between what they took and what they lost kind of mitigated itself. Mostly it was a lot of destruction of military assets on both sides during that conflict. Anyway, so all these different planets and systems, that you just a smattering of these. And like I said, when we talk houses, so there's a pull-out map for the House Steiner, the Lyran Commonwealth. So when you talk about planets in the system, in a place, so they're talking roughly 300 planets, and most likely it's twice that when you add in, and I say this in every one of these, when you add in mining colonies, mining outposts and operations, and subsidiary stuff, where what's considered a registered town in our country. If you look at any country in the world, you have cities and towns, villages, what have you, that are considered accepted communities, and then there's a lot of stuff that's not. So there's a lot of territory and a lot of small independent stuff. So where we'd have small, tiny little villages and once were towns that died out, but there's still a cluster of houses and maybe a business, or just a few houses within the vicinity of each other, and the scattering of farmsteads and ranches and things like this. So it's the same concept. So you're going to have these settled planets, major and minor, of the 300 or so, and they're going to have a couple hundred more, potentially 1,000 more surrounding. So you might have one key settled system, planet in a given system, and that system may have a dozen planets in it. And of those planets and the moons, they may have colonies on them that don't qualify as a settlement. They support a mining operation or some kind of resource facility or some whatever. And so it just gives you the gist that the houses are much bigger and grander than what's being portrayed. But anyway, that's House Steiner and the Lyran Commonwealth. And this is Rick, and here's to the table, and you guys have a great day.